It all started on an ordinary Wednesday evening. My husband, Daniel, had left for a late dinner with his boss, something that had become routine over the past few months. I stayed home, the kind of quiet that feels heavier than it should. I remember sitting on the living room couch, the dim light from the lamp casting a warm glow over the room, and thinking about how little time Daniel and I had spent together lately. Work had swallowed him, and while I understood that, a small, restless part of me always lingered at the edge of my thoughts. The doorbell rang just as I was stirring my tea, a gentle chime that seemed louder than usual in the silence. I wasn't expecting anyone, so my first thought was that it must be a neighbor or maybe a delivery. But when I opened the door, there he was, Mr. Harper, Daniel's boss. He looked slightly uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, holding a small envelope in his hands. "Hi, Laura," he said, his voice softer than I expected. "Daniel just left, right?" I nodded, surprised. "Yes, he just went a few minutes ago. Is everything okay?" He smiled faintly and stepped inside at my hesitant invitation. His presence was calm, almost unassuming, but there was a tension behind his eyes that made me curious. He placed the envelope on the coffee table between us and sank into the armchair opposite me, the kind of chair that always seemed too formal for our cozy living room. "I didn't want to leave without talking to you," he said after a pause, looking down at his hands. "There's something about Daniel, something I think you should know." My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't sure what to expect: praise, a warning, maybe even a complaint. But the way he said it, with such quiet care, made me lean forward instinctively. Over the next few minutes, he told me stories about Daniel at work, stories I had never heard before. About how he'd stayed late to help a struggling colleague, how he'd gone out of his way to mentor someone new, even how his creativity and kindness had quietly influenced the whole office. I listened, captivated, but more than that, I felt a swell of emotion rise inside me. Not pride, not jealousy, not even curiosity. Something softer and deeper, a recognition of a side of my husband I rarely saw in his natural element. And then he looked up at me, really looked, and said something I didn't expect. Something that made my pulse quicken, my hands clutch the fabric of my skirt without thinking. It wasn't flirtatious, or even particularly intimate in a conventional sense. It was far more subtle. It was a moment of shared humanity, of acknowledgement, of seeing someone fully without pretense. That evening, as Mr. Harper prepared to leave, I realized that the world I thought I knew, my quiet, orderly life, had just shifted ever so slightly. Something had been unlocked, a new layer of connection and understanding, and I had no idea where it would lead. By the time I closed the door behind him, the envelope still resting on the coffee table, I felt a strange mix of anticipation and reflection. There was a story inside that envelope, and even though Daniel had no idea, I knew that my life, and perhaps my heart, was about to be touched in a way I couldn't have predicted. I didn't open the envelope right away. Instead, I sat there on the couch, staring at it, as if the faint hum of the lamp and the quiet ticking of the wall clock could somehow tell me what to do. Part of me wanted to peek inside, but another part hesitated. Something about the moment, the way Mr. Harper had looked at me before leaving, made me feel as if opening it too soon might break some fragile, delicate tension in the room. Finally, curiosity got the better of me. I carefully tore the envelope open and slid out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a letter in the traditional sense, not really. It was more like a note, written in neat, precise handwriting that didn't quite match the rougher, more practical man I had imagined in Daniel's stories. And it wasn't just addressed to me. It felt like it was meant for me, in a way that reached past ordinary social niceties. "Laura," it began, "there are things about Daniel that most people don't see. He carries a quiet strength, a patience that many mistake for reserve, and a generosity that goes far beyond what anyone at the office could imagine. I hope you know how rare it is and how deeply he values the people around him. Tonight, I just wanted you to know that your husband is extraordinary in ways that aren't always visible, and it's a privilege to witness it." I read it twice, slowly, as though savoring the rhythm of the words. Then a warmth spread through me, like sunlight sneaking in through a window I hadn't noticed before. Pride, yes, but also something subtler, a profound awareness that the life I shared with Daniel contained layers I hadn't fully understood. His everyday gestures, his soft laughter, the way he held my hand when he thought I wasn't looking, all of it now seemed illuminated in a new light. I sank back into the couch, letting my mind wander, feeling a deep, almost tender curiosity about Mr. Harper. What kind of man takes the time to reach out like this? To share an honest, heartfelt observation without expectation. There was a grace in his candor, a patience in the way he approached something delicate. And I found myself wondering, not in a romantic way, but in a profoundly human way, how someone could touch your life simply by noticing it. That night, the house felt alive in a different sense. The shadows seemed softer, the air warmer. I poured myself a glass of wine and wandered into the kitchen, thinking about the subtle moments that make life worth noticing. The way Daniel had laughed that morning when he spilled coffee on his shirt, the way he'd kissed my forehead before running out the door. Suddenly, those little fragments of ordinary life were imbued with extraordinary weight. As I finally tucked the note into my favorite book on the shelf, I realized something important. This was more than just a gesture from Daniel's boss. It was a mirror, reflecting back the parts of our lives that often go unseen. It reminded me that even after decades of shared routines and familiar habits, there are still surprises, still discoveries, still moments that can make your heart pause and marvel. By the time I went to bed that night, I felt an unusual mix of calm and anticipation. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or whether I'd ever speak to Mr. Harper about the note, but I knew that I had glimpsed something rare, an unexpected kindness that had revealed more than just the goodness in my husband. It had revealed a capacity for connection and understanding that I hadn't expected, and that thought stayed with me, quiet but persistent, as sleep finally claimed me. The next morning, the envelope sat on the kitchen counter like a quiet invitation. I brewed my coffee slowly, trying to savor the ritual, but my mind kept drifting back to the note and Mr. Harper's unexpected visit. There was something about the way he had spoken to me, so careful, so deliberate, that left a lingering sense of intimacy, the kind that doesn't demand anything but simply asks to be acknowledged. Daniel was gone early again, as usual, and I found myself moving through the house in a haze of thought. I wandered into the study, the room where he spent countless hours on his projects, and ran my fingers over the smooth surface of his desk. His presence lingered in small, almost imperceptible ways, the faint scent of his cologne, the crumpled notepad he'd left on the corner, a pen lying askew. It struck me that in all the years we'd been together, I had rarely taken the time to notice these little details, and suddenly they felt like clues to the man I thought I knew so well. Then, unexpectedly, my phone rang. It was Mr. Harper. My heart skipped. I hadn't anticipated hearing from him again, and for a brief moment, I considered ignoring it. But something inside nudged me to answer. "Laura," his voice came, calm and steady. "I hope I'm not intruding. I just wanted to follow up from last night, see how you're feeling." I hesitated, then smiled softly. "Hi. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about Daniel, about how you see him." My voice sounded small, almost fragile, even to my own ears. "I'm glad," he replied. "It wasn't just about praising him. I guess it was about noticing the things that matter, that are often overlooked. And I thought you should know, because you see the other side of him, the one that's private, intimate, unguarded." His words hung in the air, and I realized that this conversation, this exchange, was more than polite office courtesy. There was a rare honesty in the way he spoke, a patience and thoughtfulness that invited trust. I felt a shiver, not fear, not desire exactly, but a sharp electric awareness of being seen in a way that few people ever truly experience. We spoke for a while longer about small things at first, then about larger truths, the weight of responsibility, the quiet ways people show love, the subtle gestures that reveal character. He didn't rush me. He didn't demand anything. He simply shared his perspective, and in doing so, opened a window into a world I had rarely considered. By the time I hung up, I felt oddly lighter, as if a subtle layer of worry or tension had lifted from my chest. I realized that the experience wasn't about secrecy or scandal, and certainly not about betrayal. It was about understanding, about recognizing that people are larger and more complex than the roles they play. Later that afternoon, I found myself sitting by the window, the envelope tucked into my lap, sunlight warming my face. I thought about Daniel, the man I had married, the man who carried both strength and vulnerability with quiet dignity. And I thought about Mr. Harper, who had reminded me that noticing, acknowledging, and speaking the truth of someone's character could be a deeply emotional, even transformative act. In that soft, still moment, I understood something profound. Life isn't only about the obvious gestures, the shared laughter, or the routine of daily existence. It's about the hidden layers, the unexpected truths, and the quiet connections that make us feel alive. And sometimes those truths arrive in the most unlikely forms, knocking gently on your door when you least expect them. That evening, Daniel came home earlier than usual. The house smelled faintly of simmering soup, and the golden glow from the kitchen lamp made everything feel softer, warmer. I greeted him at the door with a quiet smile, trying to tuck away the swirl of thoughts from the day. Part of me wanted to tell him everything. The note, the call, but another part of me realized that some moments are meant to exist in their own delicate space, unspoken yet deeply understood. We settled into the living room with our tea, the kind of routine that always seemed ordinary, yet tonight felt subtly different. I watched him, really watched, the way he rubbed his hands together when he was tired, the faint crease at the corner of his eyes when he smiled, and I felt a surge of gratitude for the life we had built. "Long day?" I asked softly. He nodded, settling into the couch beside me. "The usual, but I wanted to come home early tonight, just to see you." And in that simple sentence, I understood everything. The ordinary gestures, the quiet love, the decades of shared history. All of it carried a weight and beauty that no letter, no call could fully capture. But somehow, the experiences of the past few days had opened a new lens through which I could see him, and through which I could see myself. I glanced at the envelope tucked on the coffee table, now folded neatly. It wasn't a secret to hide, nor a confession to make. It was a reminder of Daniel's quiet strength, of Mr. Harper's honesty, and of the way life continually invites us to notice, to feel, and to grow. Later, after dinner, I found myself in the study again, the room that had felt so charged with curiosity and reflection. I picked up a pen and wrote a few lines of my own, not to send, not even to show anyone, but to capture the sense of clarity that had settled over me. Sometimes understanding and connection don't need to be acted upon. Sometimes simply recognizing them is enough. As I walked back into the living room, Daniel was reading by the window, the soft lamplight making the pages glow. I sat beside him, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the full weight of contentment, not the flashy, obvious kind, but the quiet, steady warmth that comes from knowing the depth of a life shared. That night, as we settled into bed, I reflected on the unexpected lessons of the past few days. Life has a way of surprising us, of nudging us into seeing what we might otherwise overlook. It's in the small acts of observation, the gentle truths spoken without fanfare, and the rare moments when someone reaches out with sincerity, that we find the most meaningful connections. I closed my eyes and thought about Mr. Harper's visit, the note, and the conversation that had followed. But more importantly, I thought about Daniel, about the layers I hadn't noticed, the patience, the kindness, and the quiet brilliance that make him who he is. And I realized that love, in its truest form, isn't just about what we see every day. It's about what we notice when we take the time to truly look. For the first time in a while, I felt fully present, fully connected, not just to Daniel, but to the small, intricate tapestry of life around me. It was a lesson in observation, in appreciation, and in the subtle, unspoken bonds that make life rich and profoundly moving. And as I drifted into sleep, I carried with me a sense of peace, gratitude, and the quiet joy of having glimpsed something rare and beautiful.